So I'd like to talk about a problem that Brexiteers don't like to talk about, because it's quite interesting why they don't like to talk about it, and I'm going to show why that is. So a big thing is made of immigration and what we're going to do with all these EU immigrants in our nation. Now, here's the thing that Brexiteers don't like to talk about. There are currently 1.2 million UK citizens living in Europe. Now, come a no deal, which is, again, every day this goes on, is potentially the most likely outcome of what is going to happen. This is, it's the worst case scenario, and it's potentially the one that's going to happen. This will be the most damaging to our country there can possibly be. And we've talked about, the 9 things that are potentially going to happen on a no-deal Brexit day. But what then happens to these 1.2 million, UK citizens that are now living in Europe? Well, let me tell you what essentially happened. As soon as Article 50 was triggered, the EU came out and said that nothing changes for these people as long as this is reciprocated. This has not been reciprocated by the UK government. It still has not been reciprocated. What has been offered has almost been a second-class citizenship, and all the EU 27 have all said this is an issue. If this is not resolved, then come voting on a deal, then they are going to downvote it. This is important to them as it is important to us, because what then happens? You would literally have 2 things happen. So a no deal happens, and immediately these British citizens are no longer covered under the EU freedom of movement rules. They are then left to the mercies of that individual country. And Spain, by the way, has for years, this is something again that's not very talked about their massive complaint about the number of old age citizens living in Spain in retirement homes, because they have free access to use Spanish medical services, and the Spanish continue to complain about how they are using important services and not paying what they should be paying. So expect a massive increase, certainly given the fact that Spain is currently a right-facing government. They would almost certainly boot the UK citizens back to the UK. You would then have a massive influx of people, needs. This would increase on the NHS. This is something that has not been thought about, and Brexiteers don't like to think about. But that is the case. Of course, you then get the opposite. You have non-UK citizens living in here, but under the freedom of movement rules, they have been allowed to live here for years. You now have these people who've had children in this country, who have lived and grown up in this country, but are not classed as UK citizens. What are you going to do with those? You're just going to kick them back to a country they've never lived in or even grown up in. What potentially happens to them? This is a massive issue, and we should be reciprocating the offer that the EU has made. And by the way, if we do stay in the single market, we then have to keep freedom of movement rules. That is that is unconditional. That we have to keep that if we stay in the single market, and we want to stay in the single market to try and reduce as much damage as possible to the UK. So, I'd be very interested to hear from any people who are UK citizens who do live in Europe. What's happening to them? Have they been told? What have they been told? We've heard that following Brexit, there was a story about a guy who lived in Switzerland who basically couldn't take a contract out on his apartment for longer than 6 months, because under the Swiss rules, immigrants who are non-EU citizens aren't allowed a housing contract potentially longer than 6 months, unless they have applied for Swiss citizenship, or there are these huge problems that is going to cause for these people, and there are myriad of other potential problems to this. So let's not beat around the bush. This is going to be a problem, but of course, it's just quietly swept under the rug because these aren't, shall we say, non-British people. So of course, immigration suddenly isn't a problem, which is rather telling. So let me know what you think, particularly if you live in a if you are you are a UK citizen, but you live in, an EU country. I'd be very interested to hear what's happening in your neck of the woods, so to say.